great debate. This is the first time we've done this, and we're trying a new format, new idea. I'd make an apology. There was going to be some nice, soft, cuddly toys that were going to be thrown at people if they went over their 5 minutes, and I couldn't steal them off my 2-year-old daughter this morning, so I didn't get them. But the debate is a new format and a new idea. So to kick off, few of us here sharing via Twitter would doubt the premise that the internet is leading us to a world in which knowledge is increasing at a rapid rate. Whether it's doubling every 5 years or less is questionable. But what is beyond doubt is that in 12 or so years of education, we can expose students to only a small fraction of that knowledge. Those who have ever been on a curriculum committee will know that the question of which small fraction to include can lead to pistols at 40 paces. While some of us may see such an argument as pointless in a world where instant access to any information is more and more being taken for granted, others make a strong case for ensuring that some things must be part of any education and can't be left to chance. I'm sure that many of us who took in Robin Trevaux's message yesterday would want to put cyber safety in that category. In the same vein, it would be hard to imagine that a student in this region who had not been exposed to names like Mao Zedong or Sun Yat-sen and their role in the foundation of modern China that is part of their everyday life. I could go on and discuss the importance of teaching the scientific method for debunking weird health food claims, or financial awareness to avoid Nigerian internet scams, but I'll be stealing the thunder of my colleagues here who will solve this conundrum for us for good. We have described this dilemma of prescribed curriculum in the following statement. Once a student has a good grasp of basic literacy, including, of course, digital and information literacy, and numeracy, the content in any curriculum is entirely irrelevant. All that's necessary for literate and numerate students is to be inspired to deeply learn content in which they have interest. Those who sit to my right broadly agree, while those who sit on my left think otherwise. To settle this, we will be introduced to each of the 6 speakers in turn. They will have up to 5 minutes of carefully considered comments, after which you, the audience, will have some of your most voted questions from Google Moderator put to the appropriate side. Now, to explain Google Moderator and how we access it, I want to call up Justin Hardman to come and just walk us through that. Justin.
So for the Google Moderator, you do need to have a Google account, and the URL for that is going to be on the screen in 1 second, but it's also in your book, which was given to you in your bag at the beginning of the conference. There's also a little QR code there that you can scan. Essentially, that URL is tinyurl.com/21CLHK debate. Okay, and you can use that site to both submit questions that you want to ask one of the panelists or debaters, and you can also vote on questions that you would like to see asked. And there's actually an interesting story behind the Google Moderator. It was built by one of the Google employees as part of their 20% time. And why they built it was because at Google they do a lot of seminars for their employees with interesting speakers, and this particular individual felt as though quite often it was the loudest voice in the room that got to ask the questions, and he wanted the best questions to be asked, not just whoever put their hand up first or shouted the loudest. So definitely make your voice heard today in the questions by voting on the Google Moderator site.
Why don't I get the first intro out of the road, and we'll just introduce Howard so he can kick off once we're up and running. Howard Stribble is starting the debate. He is the head of school at one of the fastest growing international schools in Asia. The International School of Macau is 10 years old and has over 900 K-12 students, including day and boarding school students. The school was the first to be accredited to use the Alberta, Canada curriculum. At TIS, the curriculum is infused with collaboration, inquiry and technology. Howard has a Master's in Education from the University of Lethbridge, where he developed a framework that borrowed from chaos and complexity theory as a form of pedagogy for teaching. He was one of the first students to create a digital flash-based dissertation. He splits his time in Macau between the school, his family and the various poker rooms. And for those of you who know Macau, there are many of them. So Howard will kick us off.
Great, thanks, Paul. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It is an honor to be speaking to you this morning. When Paul asked me to come and share this morning, I didn't realize I would be among such distinguished speakers and I certainly feel a bit like a Christian thrown to the lions. Since we're starting off the debate, let's look at the motion that's been proposed, and let's really strip it down, because it's pretty wordy. You can get kind of tied into it. First of all, there's this notion of literacy. We can throw in all sorts of modifiers: digital literacy, information literacy, numeral literacy. But I think we can all agree that it's just literacy. That any school that attempts to define literacy without all of those components is certainly defining literacy in a very anemic way and is a disservice to students. Agreed? Now, let's also look at who is the motion targeted at. Obviously, it's education in general. K-12 specifically, we could argue that primary school maybe is focused on literacy competencies, and then what does this mean for secondary school? And here is where the debate lies. I would propose to you that we could strip this down to schools should only inspire students to deeply learn interesting content. Schools should only inspire students to deeply learn interesting content. Now imagine, if you will, a few years from now, a former student comes up to you and they introduce themselves and they say, "Mr. Strabel, you taught me to read and write and to learn deeply." Wow, that would feel pretty good, wouldn't it? You know, that's one of those Longfellow moments. That's one of those John Keating, Captain, my Captain types of moments. However, I want to propose to you that it doesn't happen very often and it's not very realistic. More likely, you're to have a student come up to you that says, "Mr. Strabel, after I left your class, I realized that polynomials really have no place in the real world. I realized that the B&A Act is still pretty boring, no matter how many times you dress up as Sir John A. Macdonald. But you taught me how to think. You gave me the tools. You exposed me to a wide variety of content. And once I got a few years past the chaos of puberty, I was able to dive into math theory and policy creation, and I was able to use my education." Am I suggesting that we should encourage boring content, uninteresting content? A little bit. Not in a parochial kind of way, not a, here, I'm going to dish this up and it's boring and bland, but you're going to like it and you're going to have a smile on your face while you get through it. But what about risk-taking? What about exploring ideas and content that we didn't even know existed as students? What about being pushed to complete something, an essay, a math problem, a project that we may not have found interesting or inspiring, but we earn that feeling of accomplishment afterwards? How many of us have had students who walked into a science lab saying, "Ooh, gross, I can't do that," and only minutes later to have them fully engrossed in what they were doing? It could have been the formaldehyde, but I propose to you that maybe it was something a little bit else. How many of you grew up wanting to be a teacher? Yeah, very few of you are willing to admit it. More than likely, maybe you mentioned it to your parents, "Mom and Dad, I want to be a teacher," and they said, "Oh no, he'll never make any money. Cancel that early retirement." But I'd propose to you that someone came along and made an impression. Maybe it was someone like Mrs. Crabapple. I can still hear her click-clack high heels coming down the grade 6 language arts hallway. Mrs. Crabapple made literature the most boring subject
please.
On the face of the earth. But maybe she was a genius because I rebelled against her. Or Mr. Rustling, my homeroom teacher in junior high, who when the announcement came out for volleyball tryouts, looked at me and said, "You, why don't you try out for volleyball?" I don't know what he saw in me. Those of you who remember Saved by the Bell and that odd little creature called Screech, that was me, except I was 6 feet tall. But he saw something in me. I wasn't interested in volleyball. I wasn't waiting for a muse to come and inspire me. But had I missed those opportunities, those exposures, I would have missed the world of Shakespeare, Donne, Keats, and Browning. I would have missed the world of volleyball and joy. The joy of a liberal arts education is not that all the content is about candy, floss, and ponies. It is the joy of exploration and discovery. It is the joy of accomplishing something rigorous. The joy of learning to think and having the prerequisite skills and knowledge so that the world is open to us, not narrowed down.
Thank you, Howard. Excellent. Okay, our first speaker for the affirmative is Peter Sutton. Peter is the product of the baby boomers. He comes with a rich teaching pedigree, education running through his veins from an early age as the son of an Australian school principal who later became a senior New South Wales education bureaucrat and political advisor. Peter was one of the first special super graduates to come out of New South Wales tertiary education system in the early 1990s. He was teaching in rural government schools. He was appointed as a principal of a school in New South Wales at the age of just 24. Doesn't look much older now, does he? Although some would argue this status, as the school had only 10 boys, of which 6 were brothers. Cheating, isn't it? His professional career, which includes a variety of school leadership and consulting roles in New South Wales, the United Arab Emirates and Hong Kong at the Chinese International School, has been driven by a passion to implement effective change that sticks, using the latest tools, programs and technologies to assist learners of the child, adolescent and adult size reach their full potential. More recently, he relocated back to his home country and watched his wife build their house, while Peter established Kai Ming Consulting, of which the charter is providing organisations with social media solutions to minimise risk and strategically develop their online communities. Peter, who has a master's degree in adult education and training, majoring in change management technology, will offer some unique insights to the debate. To you, Peter.
Thanks, Paul. Good morning, everybody. My immediate response to this particular question was a little bit of confusion. It's big, it's wieldy. And on short reflection, I began to consider what the statement actually meant to me in terms of what inspired me to deeply learn in and around the content that was of interest. Several themes started to spring to mind: context and relevance that supported what I was as a learner and my learning needs. Curiosity, did it pique my interest? Could there be a safe element of risk-taking? Did the physical learning space and the norms of the learning environment suit my particular learning needs? Was there flexibility? Was there scope for it to meet my preferred learning style and provide me with some multiple pathways to learning? Connections, both conceptual and with my learning partners, whether they be my peers or my teachers or my parents. Questioning, critical appraisal. Was there an expectation by my teacher that I needed to be very critical in what I was doing or what they were asking us to do? A scaffold of an explicit, overarching process that was going to help me reach my particular learning targets. Without this mix, then I found it difficult to be motivated. I was certainly difficult to be engaged, and I didn't feel that I could be or personalise my own particular learning. So what happened when these elements were alive? What would happen when these elements were not alive and well in my learning experience and content was king? As Paul said, I'm a product of the baby boomers. In the 1970s, my elementary education was best described as a little bit off-centre, or at least my engagement in it. My brain was just not that good at retaining and regurgitating teacher-directed content. Content ruled, and it was delivered in a haze of chalk dust and scratchy overhead projector marking pens. My interest became more in the smell of a freshly printed worksheet on a spirit duplicator, the curiosity of why it smelt the way it did, not the content that had actually been printed on there, and we were given lots of them. This approach to learning and teaching did very little to engage and motivate me in content. I was attentive, enthusiastic, but not engaged, and I was one of those individuals with the glazed eye looking back at the teacher for some sort of guidance. My high school experiences were not much different. They too reinforced my attitudes and the inadequacies that I began to develop around the role of retaining and regurgitation of content driven by teachers. I quickly found out that I was not going to be an academic fit. In science, I knew it was going to be a fairly uninspiring year when the teacher walked in with an ex-student's workbook to copy the content from that workbook onto the board and then spend the last 5 minutes discussing what she'd written up. This was made even worse one year because one of those books belonged to my elder brother. He was an academic fit, and this was the reliance on content at its worst. Woodwork was appealing, practical, or at least I thought. One unit of work, we studied resistant materials and I made a wooden mallet. The balance of the unit, unfortunately, was in the content, reviewing the properties of hardwoods and softwoods and other resistant materials. I made that mallet, and that mallet appeared 29 years later this Christmas. And I thought it'd be a really good idea to take it out to help construct a metal trampoline for my children at home. And there it was. I took one big swing and it broke. Metal on wood, not good. Living proof that I had not retained the content specifics of resistant materials. I've not ashamedly shared this with my wife because she is actually a design and technology teacher and she's an ex-Shartin staff member, so she also says a hi from Australia. And I expect that secret's kept up here within Hong Kong. In my 13 years of mandatory education, I was left in no doubt as to the dominant role content played in learning, and I didn't like it. So when did I begin to question that content was king? I returned to the classroom as an elementary teacher. Here I could readily identify with that glazed eye look from students. Disengagement and disinterest flourished. And I knew very quickly that I had to do something. I felt it was never enough that I alone deemed the content to be taught as a starting point for the successful learning of all children.
Time, please.
All right, summing it up. Thankfully, there's been a lot of change in terms of the explicit process. We've got curriculum frameworks, program planning methodologies, assessment for learning, assessment of learning, assessment criteria, scope and sequences around skills. All of these combine with the new learning collaborative technologies that make the liberal way of approaching content more and more important.
Thanks, Peter. Thank you. Okay, starting to build up. Our next speaker, again for the negative, is Dr. John Turner. John's bio is those who can do, those who can't teach. And those who can with computers don't end up in education. And then we're left with heads of educational technology, which is what John is, but can't explain it. He once taught in Australia, spent 2 years in the Middle East, and now walks the corridors of Canadian International School trying to look busy. He has few passions, he's of little interest, and still struggles with digital literacy. Therefore, he's ably equipped to speak against the statement. John.
Thanks, Paul. As all speakers have said, this is a very complex statement and we need to look at it in parts. And I'm going to start with the part of the deeply learned content in which you have an interest. That's what started my thinking of this debate. And I thought, well, what are the passions that we all would pursue in our learning? And I ended up with sex, money, and rock and roll. So, starting with rock and roll, I really summed up this statement in that the famous Beatles song, All You Need Is Love. In other words, if you love learning, that's all you need, nothing else matters. But I thought, well, that's not quite enough. Because if you think that way, you'll end up with the Sex Pistols and anarchy in the UK. So you need to go a bit further. Then I looked at the money side of it, and I thought, well, as has already been stated, there's no point talking about that because of the audience that's in the room. And the third part that I looked at, of course, was the sex part, which I think, and having had a 14-year-old son, that if we say that you only need to learn content in which you have an interest, for those of us who've taught grade 8 boys, we know that that would be sex and computer games. Envisage the curriculum around that. Then going to the first part where it says basic literacy. Now we could talk about that for time and time and time, as has been pointed out. Let me just warn you, I think that Paul's been talking to a few US education bureaucrats because that's the way they're going. They want you to teach their basic literacy. If we could agree on it, then we would have something. But let me tell you, you won't be involved in that discussion. There is a thread also that started with the Beatles, actually, that struck me. And the Beatles were early school leavers. Right? They went on to famous money, fortune, and they didn't need teachers. And that takes me to Malcolm Gladwell's Outsiders, which is a very interesting book that points out that if you have a passion and you wish to take it to its ultimate end, you need to spend 10,000 hours working on that passion, and then you'll become an expert like Bill Gates and various other people. The thing that also struck me in that book, he didn't need teachers. I've got a lot of Bill Gates stories, and unfortunately it would have been nice to have spoken 10 years ago because he's turned out to be a nice guy since then. But the other story is Harvard. Bill Gates went to Harvard. What did he do? He dropped out and formed a little company called Microsoft. Why? Because he didn't need teachers, right? He was pursuing his own passion for learning. In fact, summing it up, maybe we don't need the sage on the stage and we don't need the guide on the side. What we're talking about, teachers are dodos and no longer needed. Finally, the last thing that struck me in this statement is that it did not talk about the responsibility to others. It was a sad indictment of the individualism that's spreading through society, that someone would make a statement to debate without saying that you have a social responsibility. Which brings me into another bit of rock and roll. Bob Geldof and his friends said, "We are the world." He was talking about connected learning. He was talking about social learning. Where is the differences between us and the way we come together? Yes, we have so much knowledge, as was pointed out, but the knowledge and the wisdom in the room, as has also been pointed out, is far greater. It's how we bring the people together. You let your 14-year-olds go off on their own, the world is not going to be a better place. So when you're summing up this, don't confuse passion for learning with emotion because you're not happy with this part or that part. I'm reminded of the story from Life of Brian, in which Brian tells everyone, "You are all individuals." And someone in the crowd stands up and says, "I'm not." Be that person. Vote against this because you're connected to everyone else. And if you're not going to vote against this statement, think about if you vote for it, you're likely to lose your job. Thank you.
Excellent point to finish on, John. Our next speaker is, we're fortunate to have, he's only just off the plane. Professor Sugata Mitra is Professor of Educational Technology at the School of Education, Communication and Language Sciences at Newcastle University in the UK. He's currently also visiting professor at MIT Media Lab, and if you're lucky, he might tell you what he's doing there. He is best known for his hole-in-the-wall experiment and widely cited in works on literacy and education. This work demonstrated that groups of children, irrespective of who or where they are, can learn to use computers and the internet on their own using public computers in open spaces such as roads and playgrounds, even without knowing English. Mitra is a leading proponent of minimally invasive education. Since the 1970s, Professor Mitra's publications and work has resulted in training and development of perhaps 1 million young Indians, amongst them some of the poorest children in the world. Professor Mitra.
I think our side has won this debate because
We're all unemployed.
because I couldn't figure out how they were, saying anything different from what we were saying. They said we don't need teachers and etc. But just to make my point, we over here we are all educated. So I was just trying a little mental experiment. I mean, suppose I were to ask you, what's Pythagoras' theorem? And hopefully, I mean, I'm sure everybody remembers it exactly. So you're saying to me, the square on the hypotenuse is equal to the sum of the squares on the other two sides, except that you didn't think it. A little voice inside is telling you that that's what it is. That little voice got programmed in school, presumably. So it's one part of your brain, it's a little tape recorder there with random access. And when you have a question, that little thing talks to you mostly about relevant things, things that your teachers thought needed to be programmed into that little tape recorder. When do you actually think? Well, I think we think when we talk about things which are interesting and completely irrelevant. For example, if I were to now ask you, were the Vikings smelly? This time the little voice won't tell you anything. You have to think it through and say, I think they probably smelled terrible. But you have to think. It's not a part of the curriculum, you know. The smell of Vikings is not, I think anywhere in the world, it's not considered a part of curriculum. Therefore, is not taught. You know, what you are taught is where did the Vikings come from? And if I ask you that, then the little voice will tell you where they came from. So if that little voice could be changed to a chip, which is inside your brain, which can connect to Google, and which can convert the Google results into voice, then why on earth do you need any school or anything like that? How far away or how difficult is it to do that? I'd say we can do it in 5 years. Just put the chip inside, connect it to the cochlear nerve, maybe to the optic nerve as well, so that when a person talks, you don't know if he's talking from his brain or he is reading off a web page. He is educated. Okay? That's it.
Thank you very much. Interesting comments to reflect on. Bear with me. Next up for the negative, and to finish off for the negatives, we have Joe Dale. And let me say that education is full of TLAs, three-letter acronyms. J.O.E. Dale is an independent consultant working in ICT in MFL, and he works for UKS, UK schools. Joe is a leading proponent in modern foreign languages and the application of ICT to those. I've been a big fan of his work, and I've subscribed to Joe Dale at typepad.com, his blog site, and he's done some leading podcasts. Very popular amongst schools in the UK, and we're very glad to have him out here. Joe, over to you.
Thank you, Paul. Well, just to start off with, I thought that last point that Sugacha just made was somewhat terrifying. To be honest, the idea that we have this Google search engine in our brains. But anyway, just to carry on from my esteemed colleague to my right, the 60s metaphor, maybe we need to think, maybe not just all you need is love, but maybe turn on, tune in, and Dropbox out. In other words, we need to raise awareness amongst teachers and pupils of the power of technology. I think it's, to a certain extent, it's a myth to say that all young people know exactly how to do all different, use different types of technology, use Web 2.0. I think that they are, yes, very good at things like texting, and some of them are very good at creating things, but I think in general, I personally think that's a bit of a myth. So I think that it's important to raise awareness amongst teachers and young people of the power of technology. We need to tune them in to what these things can do, the potential of blogging and podcasting and publishing content to a real audience, and the idea of sort of Dropboxing out, the idea of being part of a community, sharing ideas, publishing resources. I also think it's very important that we don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, that we have a blended approach towards this. Yes, technology is fantastic. In a way, I'm sure everyone here is big fans of technology, but that's not the majority of teachers. The majority of teachers don't see technology as the be-all and end-all. I think it's important we have a blended approach to the use of technology so that we choose the right tool for the right job. Sometimes it's very good to use traditional methodology. Sometimes it's very interesting to use Web 2.0 technology. The only reason we should be using ICT really is when we can't achieve something with traditional methodology, or we should use ICT to enhance traditional methodology. I think that in relation to children, once they have learned sort of the basics of literacy and numeracy, that we should just let them free. Yes, we should encourage independence, but still the children of today very much still need structure. We need to have a more skills-based curriculum Yes, they can go to Google and they can do Google searches and they can find content very easily. We need to promote a more skills-based curriculum. And I think in the UK at the moment, it seems to be that the government are encouraging, or certainly were encouraging, up until January, and suddenly Mr. Michael Gove decided that technology was a good thing, and that he was actually turned on by technology, which was a Guardian article, I seem to remember, on the BBC, which I thought was quite ironic, considering he took 100 million from the Harnessing Technology Fund to promote his free schools idea. Anyway, that's another issue. So I think that children, they need routine, they need structure, they need to feel safe. Yes, we need to encourage them to be independent, but they need to feel safe in their own environment. We need to encourage them to have ownership of their work, to promote deep learning. That to me is what deep learning is, when the children are so engaged by what they're learning that they gain ownership by creating something, accessing higher order thinking skills, publishing something to a real audience on a blog, for example. That's how they achieve deep learning and to create memorable outcomes. I think we need to encourage teachers to be more creative. Obviously, teachers are naturally creative, but they are time poor in general. And I think that we need to show them ways. This is what I do all the time, is sort of the bread and butter of what I do in the UK. I train teachers on the power of technology and how they can use technology to enhance learning. So I think we need to encourage teachers to be more creative, to publish to a real audience, and to embrace 21st century learning principles. We also need to give support to the teachers. It's all very well saying, oh yes, we should be doing this, we should be doing that, but we need to give teachers support, either in professional development sessions, online, through encourage them to be part of a community on Twitter, to write their own blog, if they have time, obviously, and to be very positive and encouraging, and not to sort of beat them over the head if they're still using PowerPoint or are fans of PowerPoint. And just to finish off with whatever it is, 50 seconds to go, I just think that we need to really have a blended approach towards education, and not to be seduced by the power of technology, but to remember things that are traditional, that have been proved to be very, very important for encouraging learning, and to have a blended approach. That's what I wanted to say. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Joe. Our final speaker for the affirmative, Courtney Lowe. Courtney Lowe is Director of Curriculum and Assessment at Hong Kong International School. During his 20 years in international education, he has held various positions that have enabled him to gain a broad view of learning, instruction and curriculum. These include university lecturer, classroom teacher, teacher librarian, building administrator and K-12 administrator. Courtney holds a bachelor's degree in rhetoric and creative writing, a master's in applied linguistics, a master's in library and information science, and is writing his dissertation for a doctorate in educational leadership. Courtney Lowe.
Thanks. I had 5 minutes of comments prepared, and they were all about Nigerian internet scams, so you did steal my thunder. So. I would like to actually just read the comments that I prepared, because otherwise I will run out of time. I believe the crux of the statement that we're supposed to be defending, but I can't claim to agree with every aspect in every detail. I do think that the thinking behind it is clear and true. If I might stretch a cliche a bit, this statement is very similar to if you give a person a fish, you feed him or her for a day. If you teach a person to fish, you feed him or her for a lifetime. Of course, this assumes that there'll always be fish, but regardless, I would posit that traditional curricula, a mile wide and an inch deep, are too often an example of giving our students fish, or more correctly, throwing them fish when they perform well on recalling useless information. Think like circus acts with seals. Not enough of teaching them to fish. Teaching them to fish, then, is basic literacy. Another way to phrase this is giving students the tools and abilities to solve any problem they encounter. When a student encounters a problem, and I mean a real problem, attached to real high stakes, like curing cancer, or feeding the population of the earth, not just those with money and resources, or dealing with or helping a troubled colleague. However big or small the problem may be, these students need basic skills to enable them to tackle those challenges. The basic literacies in the cases I just mentioned are reasoning, logistical literacies, financial, mathematical, interpersonal. The list goes on, as someone alluded to earlier. Increasingly, digital and information literacies are those that bring resources quickly to problem solvers, and they're critical. We need to learn how to navigate. But in order to help these students acquire these literacies, we need to do better than running them through the same drills and checks we went through when we were kids. We can do better than that, certainly. In essence, our traditional system now works like this. Students or children are born curious. Then they come to school. Instead of fostering that curiosity, we squash it. We tell them, yes, yes, be curious, but first let us tell you what's really important and how things really work. After all, we're smarter than you. But we never get to the curiosity part. We tell them to be patient. We know what's good for you. But our list of what's good for you is so long and getting longer by the minute that they lose interest long before we get to the part where they get to explore something. We need to cut the basics down to the truly essential and create space for younger and younger people to explore the creative solutions to problems of which they're clearly capable. My allusion earlier to curing cancer was really came out about when I read about the 17-year-old girl in California who came up with a way to target cancer cells specifically. She didn't do that by memorizing things out of a book. So basically, I agree that basic literacies are important, and I don't believe that they constitute a list of facts or basic operations for which kids must become familiar, that little tape recorder in the head that Professor Mitra mentioned. I mean, let's face it, how many of us have been humbled by watching Are You Smarter Than a Fifth Grader? To me, the fact that so many adults are not smarter than fifth graders points out two facts. One, our definition of smart must be way off. And two, much of what we learn in fifth grade must be useless because clearly we forget it. The fact that the show has spin-offs in almost 50 countries tells me this is not limited to those dumb Americans. Now, to point out the content of the point about the content of the curriculum. Is it irrelevant? Well, not in the absolute sense of the word. Of course, content must be selected, and it must be selected carefully. Students must be engaged with meaningful, genuine content. The true irrelevance today comes from much of the content that we choose for them. Much of what we present to students now clearly becomes irrelevant rather quickly. Think about, are you smarter than a fifth grader? So why do we keep focusing on it? If something is irrelevant, we don't need to keep it hanging around in our curriculum just because we had to go through it. I'm a firm believer that human nature says that we hold dear what we survived simply because we survived it. Well, let's get rid of it. Let's strip everything back to the essential content. What is much more important than coverage? Sorry, my screen is technologically challenging me. What's much more important than coverage is that students are engaged and explore with rigorous attention to the way deep thinkers actually think. Unfortunately, in much of the world these days, if I say rigor, people hear tests designed to high standards. That's an artificial mechanism we use as a proxy for rigorous understanding. What's more important is true understanding, the ability to apply acquired knowledge and skills to novel situations. And that only comes with engaging with a topic in which one has deep interest and engagement. What is relevant is that our selection of what we think is important is somehow falling short in fostering this deep understanding in large numbers of students. Let's empower students and let them choose what they're passionate about. I'm a firm believer that this will not result in a curriculum full of Justin Bieber and Pulp TV. These are the things students turn to when we don't engage them enough. Let's help them probe what is possible as true facilitators, not just show them what we already know.
Excellent. Thank you, Courtney. Okay, we have around about 5 minutes remaining, through which time we're going to choose some questions from the Google moderator behind. And obviously we'll start with the ones that are highest on the list, the most popular questions. The first one that's highest on the list, which I think is going to the team on the right who support the motion, and it is that if there is no prescribed content, and by the way, anybody can pick this up from that team, if there is no prescribed content, are we not in danger of creating a generation who enthusiastically and creatively reinvent the wheel again and again?
Well, I don't think we'll end up reinventing anything at all, because if we run into something that we don't know, we'll just Google it. So, you know, I don't see what's wrong with that. What's Google there for? So, you know, I don't think we need to teach any facts at all. What we need to teach are some very basic things like how to tie your shoelaces and that sort of thing, yeah. But other than that, but actually how to tie your shoelaces is also there on YouTube video.
Okay. Let's run with that. The next question that's highest on the list, is the messenger more or less important than the message? What role does the messenger play in making it interesting content? Over to you guys.
You want to kick?
Nobody wants to pick that one up. It's firmly bounced on the table there.
It's clear that Carrie, who proposed this question, is a Canadian and an enlightened student of Marshall McLuhan. Is the messenger more or less important than the message? Maybe the messenger and the message are not near as important as the student. And the student is not near as important as the learning. And the message, the messenger, the content are all just simply focus points by which learning navigates around. In chaos theory, we call these strange attractors. And these are things that anchor our understanding, but the purpose is, the value is not in the anchor itself, but in what happens around the anchors. What happens around the strange attractors is what leads to emergence, which is what's true learning. If we throw out the content, we throw out the messengers, then we're really left with a void. Do we really believe that teachers, you, are guilty of killing children's creativity? That was proposed by our opponents. If that's true, then really the best thing to come out of this conference is for all of us to leap off the edge of the stairwell on the way home from the conference. Because the kids would be a lot better off. I don't think we believe that. I think it's something that we do together.
Okay, let me pick up the next highest one. And the question is, why
is there room for rebuttal? Is there room for rebuttal, Paul?
Sorry?
Is there room for rebuttal?
Oh, well, beg your pardon? Yes. Why not? Why
Good,
not?
because I wasn't at all proposing that anyone should jump off the building. When I say that we kill curiosity, I don't mean teachers kill curiosity. I mean curriculum kills curiosity. Content kills curiosity. And actually, closer to this point, I believe that the messenger is vitally important. When a student encounters a teacher who genuinely has a passion in what they're teaching, that's when that passion becomes contagious. It's not the amount of content that will turn the subject into something that's contagious. So really, I think that the statement here is actually very true, that the messenger is just as important, if not more important. I mean, think about the people that you have been attracted to in the past, and I don't mean your spouse or your people that have caught your attention. Usually it's because they are really focused on something that you think is pretty cool. And so you say, wow, I want to be more like that person. And you follow them. You learn from them. That kind of messenger is really crucial. That's what I mean when I say true facilitators, educators have to be in that vein. They can't just be masters of some content that's in a book somewhere.
Okay, because we're making this up on the fly, we'll allow one rebuttal. Okay, look, the next comment I really want to respond to. Why isn't there a female on the panel? They were asked and they declined, is the answer. The next one, should we allow students to direct the content of their learning? Can they do this without a teacher? So over to you guys again. The question is, should we allow students to direct the content of their learning? And can they do this without a teacher?
Absolutely. I think the role of teaching has changed dramatically from directing student learning all the way through the process to perhaps taking an overarching map or overarching view of where things could possibly go. You know, and you're getting a lot of guidance in some of your curriculum documents. You're getting a lot of guidance in the way that you're looking at assessment for learning. There is no need to specify exactly what sort of content that perhaps an individual may learn. Being a primary teacher, we love to integrate as much as possible because that's just one of our key methods or strategies of covering lots of different things. And I think about all the years of trying to master being a literacy teacher, which I'm absolutely crap at still. You know, watching really good teachers model the way that they kept the content very open, but the strategies and the skills exceptionally explicit. led to a far richer learning experience, not just for the individual child, but for the class as a group.
Anybody interested in rebutting anything?
Oh, yes, I'll take that.
John, take it up.
I think it's already been covered by the wonderful physics lesson that we got previously, which I'm still trying to understand, but I think it was good. The issue is the statement, and the other side, they talk about as if a 5-year-old is an 18-year-old. What I find is that a 5-year-old needs the teacher to help them with the content, and as we explained, it's all about the combination of everything together. I find that creative teaching supports personal projects in the IB in grade 10, where the independent learning is enhanced by the teacher. The student provides the content. So we're talking about blended learning here. We're talking about the teacher being involved in the process. Let's not go to simple glib statements like K to 12, let students direct content, solution obtained. Let's look at it in the richness of the dynamic approach that we have in schools, and let's celebrate that rather than attack people about it.
Okay, we're going to finish it there. So you'll see behind me, to my left, to your right, you have a URL, which is the URL to go to Poll Everywhere. So if you would now just take the time, if you are online and you have a device that you can connect to, if you can go to that site. I haven't seen it, but I'm sure that we've got it set into an affirmative or a negative or a for or against. So if you can just take the time to cast that vote, and I'm sure that that will be revealed shortly. And without further ado, let me just turn around. Very, very close fought debate, but I have to say that the gentleman to my left look like they have been declared winners, so congratulations. Oh, hang on, it's changing as we speak. Very, very close. Should we shut it off now?
50-50 is fine. 50-50.
Oh, look at that. There you go. Okay. Well done. Very, very close. Again, this was a new format. It was a new idea. It was just a chance to come up with a topic. We wanted something fairly wide-ranging, and we wanted something that was going to be hotly contested, but also something that was going to be of interest to all the educators in the room. It was a challenge to get some people to respond, but I think that you'll agree with me that this morning we have had an excellent discussion and 6 excellent presenters. And I'd like you to join with me right now in congratulating all of them for having carried the mantle and done it absolutely admirably. Thank you very much, all of you.